Okay, welcome. We're on the bottom of Mem Hey Amud Beis and continuing the Lachas of Gerus. Yesterday, we had a Gemara that we said we're going to go over again because it's very big Chiddush and needs explanation. The Gemara was coming into the sugya about Goy Ve'eved Abal Bas Yisrael Havlat Kosher, which we came out yesterday. That's how we paskin that a Goy who had relations with a Jewish woman or an Eved Kanani, that child is kosher, not a mamzer. Then the Gemara brought a story of here. Started over here. Avdei the Achir Bar Abba, that he the Achir Bar Ami, he immersed a Goya for a wife, which if he didn't do it wasn't done l'shem gerus, it seems, and it says that she's kosher. It says also that the daughter is kosher because even though he was an Eved, so that we just finished saying Eved the Goya Baal Basrael about kosher. But now we're going into the sugya is it a good gerus? So yesterday the Gemara said that it's a good gerus because Milo Tovla Lenidusa. And the fact that she was tovel for her nidus is enough to make her a gioris. And the same thing the Gemara says about a man, Milo Tovla Kiryo, he went to the mikvah because he was a Balkari, he also makes him into a ger, very hard Gemara. So the Rishonim don't take the Gemara literally, it seems. And the question is that we're going to see today's Gemara that you have to have a gior has to be with Kabbalah's mitzvahs coming up tomorrow probably, and also about having in front of three people, and the tefillah has to be in the daytime with Eidim. So how do you reckon this Gemara? So there are different shatim in the Rishonim. The Rambam seems to say the most extreme to say that this is only a raya that she had a gior before. This itself is not the gior. It's just a proof that she must have been begayer properly earlier, which is a little hard in the Gemara. The Rishonim have difficulty with that. And others say, Taisva seems to say that it's talking about that there was a Kabbalah's mitzvahs already, that she did accept mitzvahs, and for he or she accepted mitzvahs before three Bezdin, and this is only for the tefillah. Maybe the tefillah itself happened to be people over there, and you don't have to have a mamash Bezdin, or the fact that we know that she or he went to the mikvah. That's also good enough, maybe as far as the tefillah. But the Kabbalah's mitzvahs surely you do need. And there's another shita also, I forgot the third shita. There's also the Rif says, Lachatchila b'diavad. The Rishonim all talk about this Gemara. It doesn't seem to be simple, so not to take it at face value. On the bottom, three lines of Mem Hey Amud Beis. Amrav Chama V'Goy Amarav, Alokech Ebed Min HaGoy, V'Kadam V'Taval L'Shem Ben Chorin, Kon Asmo Ben Chorin. So the introduction to all this is that there's such a thing as Eved Kanani. Eved Kanani doesn't mean just a goyish worker. It means that he has a status of a Eved, which is something in between a Jew and a goy. He's chayiv in mitzvahs kisha, and he has to have also circumcision and tefillah, just like a ger. He has to be circumcised and immersed in order to become a convert. So also he's circumcised and immersed in order to become an Eved Kanani, to become that status. Like we say in the morning, Baruch Atah Hashem, Shalom Sani Goy, and then Shalom Sani Yoved, then Shalom Sani Goy, and then Shalom Sani Yoved. There's a status called an Eved Kanani. And we thank Hashem that we're above that also. We're above the status of a goy and that of an Eved Kanani. Here the case was that somebody bought a slave from a goy. The goy owned the slave. The goy owned the goyish slave, and the Jew is buying the slave from the goy, and he is now immersing him in order to become a status of Eved Kanani, not just to be a worker, but he wants him to be an Eved Kanani. But the Eved, on the way into the mikvah, he said, I'm immersing not to be an Eved Kanani, I'm immersing in order to be a Jew, to be a ger. He jumped ahead of what the plan was supposed to be, and the master did not intend that he should become a ger, but that he should become an Eved. But he, on his own, it seems that the kasha is going to be it has Kabbalah's mitzvahs and was there Bezdin over there. So that's the difficulty in the Gemara. But it seems whatever the case is going to be, that it does work, that he becomes a ger. And the point of the Gemara is not only that he becomes a ger, but now he's not obligated to the master at all, and he becomes free. He doesn't have to work for him either. And the Gemara goes to explain why that should be. The fact that he becomes a ger, there seems that he went to the mikvah and there was a bezdin over there, and even though they thought he's going to become only an eved, he said, I want to become a ger, and it works. But how come he loses his obligation to work? My timer, how come he doesn't have to work? How come he becomes free? So the Gemara says on the next page, goy gufalo kanile. The goy means the goy who sold the seller, the one who sold him as a slave. He didn't own the actual body of the slave. The goy did not own the body of the slave. You know, it's not like his cow. He has the obligation to work for him. He does own his work. It's called the Gemara's B'Seis U'Maisi Yadayim. That whatever he produces, that belongs to the master. but it's not like a horse and a donkey that he owns the actual body of the animal. Here, the guy does not own the body of the slave, and therefore he only had a rights to his what he produces, what he works, and that's what he's able to sell to the Jew. It means the Jew, when he was buying the slave from the guy, he only was buying the working rights and the profits, the Ma'aseh Yadayim. That which he owns, that's what he's selling to the Jew. And once the guy became Jewish by immersing for Judaism, so now the lien that is on him for his work, that expires. And the Gemara brings the word here is a shibud. There's only a shibud. Means if it would have been that he actually owns the body of the slave, so then he would still have to work for him, even if he would have become Jewish. Maybe he wouldn't be able to become Jewish without the master's agreement. But the fact that the master only has on him a shibud, only has a lien on him that he's mechuyev to work for him. So if he got out of being goy because now he became Jewish, I think more the Rishonim seem to learn that the point is shikhr. Just like free, when you're free, if somebody there's a lien on a slave and then he becomes freed, so then the lien goes off. If someone had a lien on chametz and the issur of chametz comes, so then also the lien goes off. Someone had a lien on hektish and then they had a lien on something and the owner was makdish it, the lien goes off. I would have thought learning the Gemara means yes, like hektish. The fact that the guy made himself Jewish, now he became hektish, he became like sanctified, and that takes off the shibud. But I didn't see anybody that learns like that. They learn more like shikhr. I don't get the exact pshat in the Gemara according to that. But the point of the Gemara, the main point of the Gemara is that since now the Jew only had a shibud, when the Jew was buying the slave from the guy, he only was buying the shibud to work. Now that the slave was succeeded in making himself Jewish, he doesn't have a shibud anymore to work. So he not only is he Jewish, he also goes free. Master Rav Chisda had a kasha on this statement by, who said it today so far? By a statement by Rav. Rav said that he goes free, and there's a kasha from a brisa which seems to say differently. Master Rav Chisda had a kasha from a brisa. It says, Maisa bebeluria agioris. There was a convert, a woman. Her name was Beluria agioris. Shekad mo'avadeh v'tavlu l'faneh. She was a guy, and she had goyish slaves, and she wanted to become a gior. She wanted to convert together with the slaves. That not the slaves should become converts. She wanted her slaves to be tovah l'shem avdos. She was going to go to the mikvah. She was going to immerse for becoming a convert, and they were going to immerse in order to become Eved Kanani. But they went to the mikvah first. They went to the mikvah before she was Megayer. So she was still a goy, and they were Megayer l'shem what? So it would have been l'shem Eved Kanani. But she was not yet Jewish. So there's no such thing as being an Eved Kanani without a master. And therefore, so the case came to the Chachamim and they said that they go free because their tefillah was the same Eved Kanani, becomes to be like a tefillah l'shem gerus, and they became free. And she was only a goya. Even now that she's going to be Megaya, she'll go to the mikvah. She becomes a gerus, but she already lost her slaves. The slaves already became Jewish and free. So the diuk is the kash is because here it says that the whole issue is because they immersed before her. Tavlu l'paneha. They immersed before she immersed. She was still a goy. That's the reason why they go free, because they became an immersion without having any master upon them, because the master was still a goy. L'paneha in lachre alo. If she would have immersed first and she would have been Jewish, then they wouldn't have been able to make themselves Jewish and get out of this shibud to work. So it's a kashan Rav who says that even if the master is Jewish, but if he's tovah l'shem ben chorin, he goes free. The case over there was that they didn't say they wanted to be Megayer. They said they were doing whatever they're told to do. They were going to the mikveh in order to become a vadim. The reason why they go free over there is because there's no master. They're doing it l'shem Chatzi Judaism to become a Eved Kanani, but there is no master, so therefore their tefillah is considered a tefillah l'shem gerus. But over here, the chiddush is that here the point is that there is a master, and if they would just go to the mikveh plain the way they're told to do, it would be a Eved Kanani. But if the slave on his own says he's mefarish that I want to do this l'shem becoming a Jew, then it does work. So there's no kasha on Rav. Rav is right. The Bryce is right. If they said specifically, the slave says specifically that he wants to now, he's immersing for the purpose of becoming a Jew, it does work. He becomes a Jew, and he also gets free from his master. The case we're talking about, that Rav said that the ownership of the goy on a slave, and then the one who bought it from the Jew bought it from him, he only bought the working rights, only the Ma'aseh Yadayim, but not the actual body. That's only when a goy owns a slave. But the goy does own himself. He does own himself. So if a goy would sell himself as a slave to a Jew, so he's not only selling the work, his work, he's also selling his body. A goy does not have the rights. We're very far. The whole concept of owning a slave is very far from us. But there's such a thing as a slave, and the Gemara is saying that when a goy owns a slave, he only owns the shibud. He doesn't own his body, but the goy does own his own body, and therefore, if he would sell himself as a slave to a Jew, the Jew does own the body of the slave of that goy. How do you know there's such a thing that a goy who sells himself is really selling his body? The pasuk talks about that when you buy a slave. So it says you buy a slave from the goyim. The goyim who live in Eretz Yisrael buy from them, so you could buy a slave from the goyim. You could buy you Jews could buy from them. But a goy cannot own a Jew, and the goy cannot own another goy. Only it said that halachas of what the ownership of a slave, and what the Torah says, it could be the goyim don't listen. But if they're under our jurisdiction, so the halachas of ownership of a slave, so it says that a goy cannot own another goy, and a goy cannot own a Jew, but a Jew can own a goy. So when it says, now the Gemara is going to explain this brisa, analyze this brisa. When it says that the goy cannot buy a Jew, does that mean he cannot even buy his working rights? No, that's not true. He could. Can a goy not buy a Jew? What does that mean he cannot buy a Jew? That he should have rights to the work of the Jew, that the Jew is working for him, not only as a worker, but as the Eved. But the Eved means that he owns his hands as far as what they produce. Can a goy not own a Jew for his work? The Pasuk talks about over there that you should redeem a Jew that was bought as a slave. Over there it says that he was sold to a Eike Mishpachas Ger. Mishpachas Ger is a goy. That it means they were sold to a goy. That a Jew was sold to a goy for his work, so it's a mitzvah to redeem him. But anyway, you do see that it is possible for a goy to buy a Jew for his work. So what does it mean that the goy cannot own a Jew? It means that he can't own his body. That the goy, at most he can do is just buy the work of the Jew, but he can't buy his body. And now when it says that B'kom Rachmana Atem Konu Mehem Afilu Gufei, so the pasuk says you could buy the goy cannot buy a Jew, can't buy it from each other. So when it does say, the whole issue is talking about the body, because as far as the work, he could buy a Jew also. So when the pasuk says you could buy them, they could not buy you. So they cannot buy you means the body. They can't buy the Jewish body. But when it says that you could buy them, it means he can even buy their body also. So that means that when a goy sells himself, he's selling his body, he's selling his actual goof. The same way an animal, just for the idea, not coming to compare, but the same way an animal, his goof is owned by the owner. So too, a guy who sells himself, he's selling his body. His actual body belongs to the master. They can't do that to each other. Like the Gemara said on top, that a guy cannot own another guy for his body. He just owns the working rights. So the Gemara came out here. So 2 points the Gemara said that a guy, a few other information also came out, but a guy cannot sell another guy his actual body, just the working rights, and therefore, when he sold to a Jew and the Jew is buying from him, at this point he's only buying the guy didn't sell himself, the slave didn't sell himself. It's just as his master is selling him. He's only selling the Ma'aseh Yadayim. So therefore, if he's going to be Tovel Hashem a Jew, it'll work, and the lien that the master has on his work also goes out. He's mafkiya the shibud. But a guy who would sell himself, so the body is owned by the Jew who bought him, and it seems that he's going to have to work for him, and maybe also he wouldn't be able to be Megayah without the consent of the master. On the third wide line, this is a kasha that I think they explain that whenever it says Parach Ravachoy, it's not a Gemara, it's really the next generation of Rabbanan Savaroy and that's why he uses a different term of porich. It doesn't say like mesve. And Rav Acha has the kasha that even though it says you could buy them, you could buy a goy, maybe it doesn't mean that he's selling his body. Maybe it just means that you're able to buy him as an Evet Kanani if he agrees and he comes to your ownership by you gave him money and then also you immerse him, you successfully immerse him to become Evet Kanani. That's when you can own him, but not that he owns his body. You don't see necessarily that the goy can own him when he sells himself. He's selling his body, and the Gemara says that's a kasha, but the Gemara doesn't seem to follow up what it said, even though it's a nice kasha. But halacha still remains that a goy does own his body. So back to the main halacha that the Gemara started off with, that when you buy a evet Canaan, when you buy a evet from a goy, there is a way that he could wiggle out of being an evet. If he's gonna, when you're immersing him to become evet Kanani, he's going to announce that he's immersing in order to become a Jew, a ger. So then he is successful, and he's going to become Jewish, and also you're going to lose him as being a slave. So the Gemara now, Amar Shmuel, is going to say a precaution. How it's possible to make sure that when you're immersing him, he's not going to run away, he's not going to become Jewish, and you can still keep him to be an Evet Kanani. Amar Shmuel, if you have to hold on to him in the water, means when he's in the water, he's immersing as an Evet Kanani, hold on to him in a way that you're his boss, and he's not able to say, I'm doing it for conversion, because the fact that his master is holding on to him, that shows that he is under the jurisdiction of the master, and his immersion is only going to be to become an Evet Kanani, not to become a Jew. And the Bible is a story to that effect. Ravashi had an Evet Kanani, and he wanted to immerse him that he should become an official Evet Kanani. He wanted to immerse him, but he wanted to make sure he's not going to trick and become Jewish, and then they lose him as a slave. He gave him over to two of his talmidim, and he instructed them that they should immerse him in a way that he's surely not going to be able to escape. See that I'm going to demand him from you means if you're going to lose him, if he's going to go free, then you're going to have to pay my loss. So make sure you do it correctly in a way that he's not going to be able to do it for conversion. So they put some kind of a rein on his neck, means they showed with the fact that he had a rein, some kind of way to show that he's under servitude of the master. And when they went into the mikvah, he had this strap on him. They loosened it and then tightened it. That to loosen it first in order that it shouldn't be a chatzitza between the water should be able to get in between the strap and the body, or else it wouldn't be a good immersion. But then but then they tightened it in order he shouldn't be able to say that I'm immersing, if in order to become Jewish, it should be a immersion of conversion. And that way, he was already in service. The fact that there was a strap around him, that showed that he was in servitude. When he picked up his head out of the water, when it's coming out of the immersion, they put some kind of a package of cement, something to carry back to his master, and they told him, go take it to your master. It means that there should be servitude. As soon as he came out of the mikvah, he didn't have a chance to say that I'm doing this all for conversion. They made it clear during and after that the whole thing was just an immersion in order to become an Evet Kanani, and he gets the status of an Evet Kanani. Gemara also about the issue about the way Rashi learns that it's the ownership of a goy. Do you own the body of the goy, or do you own only the work of the goy? So we said that a regular goy could sell himself, his body, but the ownership that a goy has over another goy, a slave, is not that he owns the body of the other goy, only that he owns the obligation to work. He could have a slave that he's obligated to work for him, but not that he owns the actual body. And the Gemara means an issue about that. Papa asked Rava, that over there the issue was that there was a Goyish king and everybody had to pay taxes, and people that didn't pay taxes, somebody else who offered to pay taxes for them, so they became their slaves. The rich person who was able to pay taxes for other people that didn't have their own money to pay, so he got authorization from the king that he's allowed to take them as slaves. So the question was, does it really become mamish his slave? When they go out, when the master is going to free them eventually, do they have to have a get cheres? Do they have to have a document that frees them, a document of liberating him? Means that there's two kinds of an eved. It seems that when you own the actual body, in order to release it, you have to give him a document. The same way that a divorce document releases a woman, she's allowed to get married halachically. So too, the status that he has, that he's Eved Kanani, in order to release it, you have to give him a document. It's called the Shtar Shechua. It's a document of emancipation in order to give him freedom, that his body should get back to him. But if it's only an obligation to work, then he would not need this to get cheres. He wouldn't need this emancipation document. So that's the question. The ownership that somebody got of Goyim, Rashi says that the Goyim, the people who were bought are Goyim, that you paid taxes for somebody, for a Goy, and now you got them to be your slaves. What kind of slave is it? Is it only a Masi Adayim? Was it even Legufo, that you own the actual body of the slave? Because we said in general that you can't. It means only if he sells himself. He didn't sell himself. You bought him out because the king allowed. That was a system that the king allowed people to pay other people's taxes and own them. So according to the regular law we learned so far, it would be no ownership of the actual body. Amalei. So Rava said, "Echu shchivi lo amri lechu hamilsa." Something to the fact that if I would have died, I wouldn't have been able to tell you. It means I don't know why this is such a special thing that he says, "I'm happy that I told you before I died." It doesn't say he was going to die here, but he says like it's lucky that I was able to tell you this before I die. That he says that you do own the actual body of these slaves because Rashi says that it means their signatures. Their signatures are in the treasury of the king, and the king says whoever means that they are owned by the king. Tosh says because dina the machus adina, the fact that the government makes a law so it's binding, even halachically, and the king says whoever doesn't pay taxes could be owned by somebody that does pay tax for him. So Tosh says that even though the halacha usually is that a goy cannot own another goy's body, only the work that he does. But by the king is different. Since the Machus Adina, so the king does have a right, and therefore if you bought it from the king, you're actually buying the slave himself, the body himself. And therefore, as far as the Gemara goes before, he wouldn't be able to go free by immersing himself. And while Agmar is talking about he does need to get cherus, he doesn't have to be with a document in order to get emancipation, because he does actually belong to the master. The Gemara continues with the subject we spoke about earlier, and it's going to have more issues coming in about gerus. Rav Chia bar Abba came to a place called Gavla, and he saw a lot of interesting things that are all problematic. He saw Jewish women that were impregnated from Gerim. Means that they married Gerim, but these Gerim weren't regular Gerim. They were Gerim, they were converts that only had circumcision and didn't have immersion. That's going to be the sugi. We're going to flow into a new sugi now. How to become a convert? What do you need in order to become a convert? So we know that it has to have circumcision and immersion. But the other question was, if you only have one, is it also good enough? Is it kosher enough? So here the case was that these Gerim, they only circumcised for the purpose of becoming Gerim, but they did not immerse. And they married Jewish women, and now these women are pregnant from them. And the question is, what's going to be with the children? Are they considered mamzerim or not? This goes back to yesterday's sugya, that if he'd be a goy, two points are coming together. One is it a good gerus or not? And if it's not, then it comes out that a goy had relations with a Jewish woman. Is the child a mamzer or not? Which we came out yesterday that it's kosher, but at least that's how the subject flows in over here. And now we're going to also talk about the gerus. Is it a good conversion or not? If it's a good conversion, then it's no problem. It's a Jew, everything's fine. That was one point that he saw, and that was something that he had to investigate. He saw that there was wine of Jews that the goy would pour. He'd pour the water into the wine, and that's a question that's getting too close for comfort. That we know that if the goy is going to mix the wine or pour the wine, actual wine, so then it makes it maybe ayin esach. They're not allowed to. It's like vations for the avodah zarah. It comes also bana. So here they saw that the goy didn't actually touch the wine, but he was pouring water into it, and the Jews would drink it. Is that a problem? And the third thing that he saw, because of tamusin the shalkiyat goyim v'achli Yisrael. Also tamusin is a kind of a bean. They say it's a lupine bean. They sell it, I think, in the market, and it has to be cooked a lot. And here the goyim would cook it. The Jews would eat these beans that were cooked by goyim. And that's a question about bishul goyim, that you're not allowed to eat food even if it's kosher. But the Chazal made exeri that you're not allowed to eat food that was cooked by a goy. So he saw three things that looked very suspicious. And he didn't know what to do, it seems. He didn't tell him anything, but he came back to Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi was a Talmud of Rabbi Yochanan. He went to Rabbi Yochanan. He told him the whole problem, three problems, that the Gerim over there, they don't immerse, they just do Mila without Tvila, and they have the custom that they allow Goyim to pour in the water into the wine, and also that they eat the beans that the goyim cook. Amalei, so Rabbi Yochanan told him, go back, say, "Achrizu al b'neim shehem mamzerim, v'al yeinam mishum yain nesach, v'al temusim mishum b'shulei goyim v'lechishen b'nei Torah." He told him 3 things. The first one is that the kids are mamzerim. And the Gemara is going to explain each one of them. It means that the gerus is not a good gerus, and they're considered goyim, and the child born is mamzer, according to Rabbi Yochanan. Second one is that their wine is considered yain nesach, because the goy is as if a goy would have touched it. And these beans also are usher because they're cooked by goyim. But here he added on the fishayin b'nei Torah. And the third thing, he only said that's not minadin. The third case, only because they're not b'nei Torah, so I'm going to be machmir. Even though minadin, it would have been mutter, not considered bishul goyim. But since they're not b'nei Torah, I'm going to be machmir. And now the Gemara goes on to explain all the 3 points. Al b'neim shem mamzerim. Why is that? Why should the kids be considered mamzerim? The mothers married converts because they didn't immerse. That he doesn't become a conversion until he has circumcision and also immersion, but circumcision alone does not make him a ger. Therefore, he's considered a goy. If he's a goy, if he didn't finish the process of conversion, so he is still a goy. And what's the din if a goy has relations with a Jewish woman? It happens to be we don't pass like that. That was yesterday's Gemara. We passed not like a Yochanan. He was mentioned yesterday, but we pass on not like that. We pass in that the child is kosher. So here we would not pass like a Yochanan. We would say that the children are kosher. We do pass like a Yochanan that the gerus is not a good conversion until the immerses. That we do agree, but we don't agree with the second halacha that therefore the child is going to be a mamzer. We're going to say that the child is kosher, but the father is a goy. The second thing that was mentioned, Agav, was about the wine. This is the Gemara's expression always to say that you have to make a fence, you have to make a distancing. So it says, we take quote till the curb. Take 2 steps back. So too, here, Rashi says that it wouldn't be yain nesach because they didn't touch the wine, but the fact that they're pouring it, so it's too close for comfort, so they also have to make archaka and consider this also as if it became yain nesach. And the third one was about the temusin, and that the Gemara goes into the halacha. Just a preface. The Gemara says there are 2 aterim about the bishul goyim, that you're not allowed to eat food that was cooked by a goy, even if everything is kosher, because the goy cooked it. It's in order to stay away from the goyim. And the Gemara talks about 2 possible aterim. One is going to be if it's edible raw. It's edible raw. You cooked it, but it's edible. It would have been edible also raw. And the other heter is if it's not something which is chashuv. It's not a very chashuv of food that wouldn't go on a table of nobility. So that kind of food that's not a chashuv of food, maybe it's not the gzera because only we're interested that you shouldn't eat by goyim things that are considered chashuv of food, then it might be considered more social.
If you hang out with people to get married, these type of people are not high level, but more like bums.
No, it doesn't seem so. We were scared not of the bums, we were more scared about the nobility. That you're sitting by, go to a neighbor, go to your neighbor, you sit with him and you dine and wine, and then he'll meet his daughter also. So it seems that they weren't talking about just bumming around. So that's the question. These 2 aterim, if they apply. So these 2 Muslim, they're not edible raw, but they were not considered a chashuv of food. So first the Gemara starts that the only reason why I made the gzera al Muslim mishum b'shulei nachrim fishayin b'nei Torah. That he says the reason why I made the gzera on them is because it's the harchaka, because really it would be mutter. These beans would have really been mutter, but since they're not b'nei Torah, and if you're going to be makel on that, they're going to be makel on mamash bishul goyim. So he said you have to say that they're considered bishul goyim. But the Gemara wants to know why should it have been mutter min adin? B'nei Torah shori. If they would have been b'nei Torah, then it would have been mutter. Why is that? If something is edible raw, then there's no issue of bishul goyim. But these beans are not edible raw. So therefore, it should be asa min adin, not only a chumrah. It should be asa min adin because it's not edible raw. The Gemara answers that Yochanan kitach lishna sriulei dam Rav Shmuel bar Yitzchak mishmei derav told she'no la shulchan malachim lachal bo asapas in bo mishum b'shul goyim. The time of the Bnei Torah shari, that he was like the other lashon over there, that it says that it's only us if it's something which goes on the table of nobility to eat together with the bread. Here the Gemara says, but if it's not considered a chashuv of food, so then there's no issue of bishul goyim, and therefore this food, since it's not a chashuv of food, and it wouldn't be served on a table of nobility. So there's no Isser Min Adin. But over here, he was machmir on them because they're B'nai Torah. If they're going to do this, they're going to do other things also. They're going to need also mamish bishulakim. So these two Gemaras came up out of side. The one about Yain Nesach, the one about Bishul Goyim. The main subject we spoke about was about the first case that Gerim over there did not do Milo Tefillah. And Rabbi Yochanan said, Lo Lamein Ger, Rashi Yimol B'Yitpol, and Gemara goes into that subject. So we're continuing with halachas of Gerus. What do you need in order to become a Ger? Tana Rabbanan. Ger Shemol V'Lo Tova. It seems everybody holds the Lechatchila is supposed to do both. Everybody seemed to, that was the practice, that's the Lechatchila. It's supposed to have both circumcision and also immersion. But he only did one. So there's going to be machlokas about these cases. If you only circumcise, the Belez holds that as a ger. That's why those people did over there in Gavla. Yochanan didn't pass like that. But they said, the Belez holds that circumcision alone would make him a ger. Why? Because you find that's what it was in our own forefathers. What does it mean our forefathers? When in Mitzrayim, when they had circumcision before the Korban Pesach, like it says in Parshas Bo, so it seems that the Gemara, at Drash level at least, the Gemara is saying that was in order to become Jewish. Not only did the Korban Pesach, that's how they became Jewish. That was their conversion. The whole Am Yisrael converted. That was the beginning of the Jewish nation. So over there was no immersion. It doesn't say that they immersed. It just said over there that they circumcised. So the same way our forefathers became converts, they came to become Hashem's people with circumcision alone. So too, in all generations, that's ma'akev, only to have circumcision, even without any immersion. How about the other case? He only had immersion without circumcision. Rabbi Yeshua says, well, also we can learn out from a different aspect to show that that's also a good conversion, because the women at the time when they became Jewish in the Mitzrayim, the whole Am Yisrael converted. So over there, the women don't have circumcision. They can't. There's no such possibility. And still you see that the immersion alone was enough. The Gemara will talk later on where do you see that they immersed. But there's no circumcision, and you see that the immersion is good enough. And therefore, so to a man, even though he does have the ability to become circumcised, but the same way by women, it's not essential. So too by men, it's also not essential. And the same way a woman can become a convert with immersion alone, so too a man. But Chachamim argue on Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yeshua, they say, no, you have to have both. Either one alone is not good enough. The circumcision alone is not good enough. The immersion alone is not good enough. You have to have both. That's the end of the Brisa. So we have three opinions, and now the Gemara is going to analyze. Rabbi Yeshua nami neilach mi avos. How come Rabbi Yeshua doesn't agree to Rabbi Eliezer? Rabbi Eliezer says that circumcision alone is good enough. Rabbi Yeshua seems to say not. And the question is, why not? Rabbi Eliezer says that our forefathers in Mitzrayim, they only had circumcision. And Rabbi Eliezer nami neilach mi avos, the other way. And the Gemara is only going to deal now with Rabbi Eliezer. The Gemara is not going to deal with the first point about the Yeshua. The Gemara, I think, the Gemara, at this point, we can even take out these words of Yeshua because we're not going to talk about that now. We're talking about Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Eliezer nami neilach mi avos. How come Rabbi Eliezer doesn't agree that immersion alone is good enough? The same way the women, they only immerse and that's good enough. So how come he doesn't agree? The way to deflect that proof is to say that only by women, it's not possible to do more. But a man who could do more, maybe he has to do more, maybe it's even essential. By a woman who can't, so it's not. But by a man who could, maybe it's not only preferable, maybe it's also essential. This concept is called that you can't learn now something which is possible, something which is impossible. A woman, it's impossible for her to have circumcision. That's why it's not essential. But by a man who could, maybe it's essential. So if you hold of this concept called Ein Dan Nefesh Mashiach, so then it wouldn't be a good limud. The Yeshua doesn't hold to that. He doesn't hold to this problem. He holds Dan Nefesh Mashiach. You could learn out, even though it's possible by a man to circumcise, since by a woman you see that she could become converted without circumcision. So it has to be that it's across the board also, even though a man also. So does Eliezer agree to that or not? So you might say, Eliezer holds Ein Dan Nefesh Mashiach. You can't learn out one from the other. But we're going to prove now, unrelated topic, but we're going to show that Rabbi Eliezer holds Dan Nefesh Mashiach. You could learn out one from the other, and therefore the Gemara is going to ask the same way Rabbi Yeshua says that you learn out from women that circumcision is not essential. Rabbi Eliezer also should agree, because in conceptual he agrees to this idea that you could learn Dan Nefesh Mashiach. So see, even though by a woman it's impossible and by men it is possible, still we should be able to learn out that a circumcision is not ma'akev. So this is not our subject at all. That's what we want to get an idea. It could have been a different halacha altogether. Nothing to do with Korban Pesach. But the Gemara brings a case of Korban Pesach that it says that the Korban Pesach has to be bought only from chulin money. If you have Ma'aser Sheni money, you have money that's from Ma'aser Sheni, so you're allowed to buy meat and korbanos. But the Korban Pesach is only kosher if it comes from chulin money. How do you know that? So he says a drasha. Nema Pesach, Abelaz is talking. Nema Pesach from Mitzrayim, but Nema Pesach with Doros. We learn out of Xer Shabbal link that it says Korban Pesach, just like in Mitzrayim, also by all future generations. Ma Pesach Hamba in Mitzrayim, Ein Baal Menachulin. Ma Pesach Hamba the Doros, Ein Baal Menachulin. In Mitzrayim, there was no Ma'aser Sheni. Hashem never even said the mitzvah Ma'aser Sheni in Mitzrayim. There was no such thing. So when it says over there, Hashem said, take the Korban Pesach, obviously it came from regular mundane money. So too, Xer Shabbal is going to tell us that also for all generations, even though there does exist Ma'aser Sheni money, still the Korban Pesach has to be dafka from mundane chulin money. That was Abelaz's Russia. So Bakiva, he protested. What's the proof? By Mitzrayim, there was no Ma'aser Sheni money. That's why it was. That's why they used it. But could you learn out from there that it's always essential to have non-Ma'aser Sheni money? Maybe when there's Ma'aser Sheni money, maybe it's also good. Amalei, Abelaz said, Af Pisha Yevsha, Va'igidoli. He's not concerned with this akasha of Efsha, Efsha, even though it was impossible to have. But since you see there was only chulin, he can learn out from there and other generations also. It has to be dafka chulin. So the more is asking of Allah Lishitaso, since we see that he doesn't care about this concept of Efsha and Efsha, so here too he should say that since the woman converted with immersion alone, so too the man should be able to convert with immersion alone. How come he seems to argue on Rabbi Yeshua? So the Gemara says you're right. He doesn't argue. Ella Betoval v'lo mo kol yom lo pligi demani. Rabbi Elazar doesn't argue. Everybody agrees to Rabbi Yeshua's case, and everybody means Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Yeshua. The Chacham they're going to argue, but Rabbi Elazar agrees with Rabbi Yeshua that the immersion alone is good enough because you see by the women they did it, and he also holds done in Efsha Mishi Efsha, and therefore Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Yeshua both agree that immersion alone would make him a convert. But the opposite is the machlokes, that Rabbi Elazar is the one who's going to be lenient and say that even the circumcision alone is also good enough. And the Bishu argues on that. Rabbi Elazar and says that by the forefathers, you see, they only had circumcision in Mitzrayim. They don't see they had any kind of an immersion. So you see, it's also good enough. And therefore, according to Rabbi Elazar, either one is good enough. According to Rabbi Elazar, circumcision alone is good enough, like you see by the fathers, and immersion alone is good enough, like you see by their mothers. Rabbi Yeshua was not mitzvah lahava, but Rabbi Yeshua argues and says that you have no case where you see circumcision alone, because the men who circumcised, they also did immerse. Where do you see any place that the men immersed? Now, you don't find that they immerse in Mitzrayim. It doesn't say anything about that, about immersion in Mitzrayim. But it does say by Matan Torah, it says that you should go to the people before Matan Torah, and you should sanctify them today and tomorrow. They should wash their clothing. Which the Gemara is taking to mean, put in the mikveh. Put their clothing into the mikveh. If that's put the clothing into the mikveh, they should have to go to the mikveh themselves. We see other cases in the Torah by Tumah and Tara that sometimes it's enough to go to the mikveh himself and not his clothing. But over here, if they have to have even the clothing has to go to the mikveh, so surely he himself has to go to the mikveh. So that's what the Gemara is suggesting. Maybe that's where Rabbi Yeshua got that they also had immersion, not by Mitzrayim, but the process. It started in Mitzrayim. They circumcised in Mitzrayim, and then by came to the Har Sinai, that's when they immersed. Because you see, before Matan Torah, they immersed. That was the completion of their conversion process. But the Gemara says, no, it's not a proof. Maybe that case about washing their clothing is nothing to do with the mikvah. Not that they put the clothing in the mikvah. They put the clothing into the washing machine. They just cleaned it in order that it should be clean. Because Matan Torah, you get nice clothing in order to come to Matan Torah, not because it's a tahara. It's just a cleanliness. So there's no proof that they also had to go to the mikvah. The proof will be according to Yeshua that they immersed from this pasuk. So this is talking about after Matan Torah. The Pasuk Pshat goes after Matan Torah, and then the Pasuk Mishpatim, and it says that Moshe came from Har Sinai. He took the blood. They shechted karbonos, and over there it says he took the blood and he threw it onto the people. That was a kind of a azor. The Gemara says it's like the same way by a parah aduma that when you sprinkle the blood. So the Gemiri ein azor below tefillah. The spring it wouldn't be able to have the sprinkling of a tahara of a parah aduma without immersing. Over there, it was not by paradumas, it's sprinkling the water of the paraduma, the water with the ashes. But here it's talking about blood, but that seems to be interchangeable over here. And it's considered also like azah. And whenever you have azah, you also have to have tevilah. Whenever you have sprinkling, you also have to have the immersion. So the fact that they sprinkled the blood on the people by Har Sinai, it has to be that they also immerse themselves beforehand also. And that's where you see that they also immersed. So Yeshua is going to say, I don't see any place that there was a conversion of circumcision without immersion, because the men, they had circumcision in Mitzrayim, they also had immersion by Har Sinai. So I don't, if Yeshua says, I don't recognize a place where you had circumcision alone. So circumcision alone is not enough of a conversion, but immersion alone is enough, because you see the women had immersion alone. And the Gemara says, where do you see that there was immersion? Rabbi Shua himself, Tosfos points out, happens to say a second ago that in Azab Lo Tefillah, that everyone had L'chora had immersion by Har Sinai. But Tosfos says that maybe the Gemara is asking according to Belezer. Belezer holds that there was no immersion over there. Like he says that the circumcision alone is good enough. So if so, how does he know? He also agrees that the immersion alone is good enough for the women. Where do you see that the women immerse? It doesn't say anything about that. The Gemara answers, the women don't have circumcision. If they don't have immersion either, so how do they become Jewish? Means for sure the Gemara understands there has to be some kind of a process. It can't be just a decision, I want to do the mitzvahs, I want to be Hashem's people. There surely has to be some kind of a process. And if there's no circumcision, it must at least be immersion. So that's how the Gemara comes out. Machlokes, according to Belezer, either one is good enough, either immersion alone like the women, or circumcision alone like the men. Rabbi Shua says that only immersion alone is good, but by the men they have circumcision and also immersion. You don't find circumcision alone. But then about the third.
Like Homer.
Which one? Which way would Homer be?
The lenient spirit.
Maybe we don't know which one is more lenient. Maybe you need both. We don't know. But if you find that they had this one, we don't know which one is more important, the circumcision or the immersion. Right. So each one only says according to the historical case history. What did we see in the past? Did we see ever a conversion with one alone? So they both seem to agree that there was immersion alone by the women, and machlokas if they had circumcision alone by the men, or the men also had immersion. So that's the machlokas. But then they have a third opinion, and that's what that was the chachamim before that said you have to have both. And the concept is going to be that even though you see by the women that they don't need circumcision, that's because they can't. But a man who could, maybe it is essential that's what he paskin, that even though a woman becomes converted by immersion alone, a man has to have circumcision and immersion. And that's what the Gemara is going to paskin like now, which was the third opinion before Namad Aleph. There was a Belezer, Bishua, and then the Chachamim. He doesn't become converted until he has both the circumcision and the immersion, which is the Chachamim in the Brisa before. And the Gemara says Pshita. It says Chachamim. And we know that it's a general rule. Whenever there's a minority opinion against the majority, the halacha is like the majority. So if you have Belezer, Bishua, and then the Chachamim, of course they pass like the Chachamim. Why did Yochanan have to say it specifically? The halacha is that you have that you need both, surely. But the Gemara says no. Even though it says Chachamim, it's not dafka a majority speaking. It was Rabbi Yossi. Man Chachamim Rabbi Yossi. So it wasn't so simple. The halacha is like him. So Rabbi Yochanan had to say the halacha is like him, and that's how we pass him. How do you see that Rabbi Yossi is the one who says you have to have both? The Tanya. We had a brisa. Here comes another brisa about this issue, and it's not going to be Rabbi Lezer Bishua. It's going to be Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yossi, and we're going to see Rabbi Yossi is the one who says you have to have both. Somebody comes, a goy, he comes before a bezdin and he says, I had a Bedi circumcision. Now we can see he has some circumcision, but we don't know for sure that it was done properly. Means was it done with the purpose of becoming a Jew? Maybe it was a circumcision the way the Arabs have circumcision, or medical reasons. So we see that he has a circumcision, but he says himself that he was not immersed for Judaism, for conversion. So Matmilan also Mabakach. The Rabbi says, so just do the tefillah. Means we don't know. We don't know what happened with the circumcision, if it's a cause of circumcision to make him a ger. But the tefillah is good enough. So we'll immerse him, and there's no difference if he was circumcised or not, because Rabbi Yehuda holds like the Rabbi Lezer and like Rabbi Lezer before, and Rabbi Yeshua, that meal alone is good enough, that tefillah alone is good enough, that immersion alone, same about the women, immersion alone is good enough. So if you decided, I don't care if there was a milah, because we'll be matbul him, we'll immerse him, and that's all you need. Rabbi Yossi Omer ein matbilah. Rabbi Yossi says no, we're not going to immerse him because the immersion is not going to be enough. And since the circumcision, we're not sure if it was a good circumcision, so we're not going to make him into a ger. We don't know if he's a good ger. It means we'll have to make whatever we have to do in order to make him circumcised. That's going to be a Gemara. That's maybe they say it here, someplace else, that toughest down bris, that if somebody was circumcised and then he has to use a circumcision, you can't circumcise him again, but you could take out blood. That's the letting blood is also considered some kind of a post facto way of circumcising him again. But anyway, what do you see? That according to Rabbi Yossi, it's not good enough to have the immersion alone. You have to have also the circumcision. The Brisa ends off, Lafika Matbilan Ger B'Shabbos Div Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Yossi Omer in Matbilan. This has ramifications about another case where you know that he did circumcise. Till now we spoke what the case was. He didn't know that he circumcised. The question was, do you do tefillah alone? Now the Gemara goes the other way, that you know that he was circumcised. We circumcised him. Another question was, could you do the second process, this tefillah, the immersion, could you do it on Shabbos? And the Gemara is going to go that you can't do anything on Shabbos that's going to make an effect which is going to make him Jewish. That's considered like a tikkun. It's changing something over. Same way you're not allowed to be matbil kalim because you're making a Torah, so you can't make Tevila, you can make a goy into a Jew on Shabbos, so you can't immerse him. So now the one says it depends on this point, is it essential or not? If you hold that circumcision alone made him Jewish, so then the second process is not really making an effect. You're doing it chachila, but not that he needs it to become Jewish. He's Jewish already. So then you'd be allowed to matil him on Shabbos. But if you hold that the milah alone is not enough, the circumcision alone is not enough to make him Jewish, you also have to immerse him, then you wouldn't be allowed to do it on Shabbos because that's making him Jewish. The fikach, matil and ger Shabbos did Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda holds that if somebody was already circumcised, you would be allowed to immerse him on Shabbos because you're not affecting anything because he's Jewish anyway. Rabbi Yossi Omer not feeling because you are now affecting his Jewishness, as the Gemara is going to explain now. Amamar, the fikach matil and ger Shabbos. Did Rabbi Yehuda? Rabbi Yehuda said you may because there is very circumcised. Pshita chivadam Rabbi Yehuda b'chadasagi heichadam olafanei matbilin. It's pashut. Since Rabbi Yehuda already told us that one is enough, he told us that the immersion is good enough. So too the Gemara is assuming that the circumcision alone is enough. So therefore, once we know that he's circumcised, so why should there be a problem to immerse him on Shabbos? The Gemara says, you don't need it. It doesn't have to say it. The Gemara answers, you wouldn't know it. That it didn't say openly that Yehuda holds that circumcision is enough. He said that immersion is enough. What was the case we spoke about? That he came in front of us and we didn't know about his circumcision. But Rabbi Yehuda says, so let's do the immersion. That's good enough. So you don't necessarily see that either one is good enough. Maybe he holds dafka the immersion. Everything's totally in the immersion, like we had before. Rabbi Yoshua holds that the immersion alone is good enough. The circumcision alone is not good enough. So you would think Rabbi Yehuda also holds like that. So therefore, you have to tell you that no, either one is good enough. According to Rabbi Yehuda, he holds like Rabbi Lezer, let's say, that either one is good enough. The immersion alone is good enough. The circumcision alone is good enough. So therefore, Rabbi Yehuda says has to speak out. Not only is the immersion alone good enough, the circumcision alone is also good enough. And therefore, if we know he was circumcised, kosher, so then he could even do the immersion on Shabbos because it's not affecting any change. And now also the same thing with Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Yossi Omer not bilin on Shabbos because you're affecting him to become a Jew now because the circumcision is not enough. Pshita, if Rabbi Yossi, we know already that he holds you have to have both stages, so surely you're not allowed to do the second one on Shabbos. But the Gemara says he wouldn't have known that. The beginning of the Brisa that says that according to Rabbi Yossi, the Tevila is not enough. What was the case again? That he came before us and he said that he was circumcised, kosher. Well, we don't know. We can't trust him. And Rabbi Yossi says it's not enough to do the immersion. So all you see is that the immersion is not good enough. But you don't see that he holds that the circumcision is not enough. Maybe he holds that the circumcision alone is enough. And therefore, if that was done before Shabbos, he could also do the immersion on Shabbos. So the Brisa had to say no, that he holds that you have to have both. It's not good enough. The immersion alone is not good enough. The circumcision alone, you have to have both. And that's how Rabbi Yochanan Paskin. All the Gemara did with all this is to show that the opinion called Chachamim is really only Rabbi Yossi, so it wouldn't be a rabbim, so it wouldn't be so taken for granted. That's how we paskin. But the Ma'aser, that's how we paskin. That's Rabbi Yochanan Paskin. That's how we paskin. That in order to become a convert, it has to be two. For a woman, of course, immersion is enough. But for a man, he also has to have circumcision. Either one is not good enough, and therefore you're not allowed to do it on Shabbos. Even though he's circumcised already, he wouldn't be allowed to immerse on Shabbos because that would make him Jewish, and that's affecting the change. Is also on Shabbos because it's considered a tikkun. It's considered that you're fixing something. The Gemara continues. Amar Rabba. Well, yeah, stop over here. Amar Rabba. Uvda be Rabbi Chia bar Rabbi. Rav Yosef Masni Rabbi Shai bar Rabbi. Rav Safra Masni Rabbi Shai bar Rabbi Chia. There was a story with this person. Now, to which person? So the way the Gemara is going to read, and Rashi says so, would be a chiddush, but that's how it's muchach in the Gemara, that Rabbi said that the story was by Rabbi Chia bar Rabbi. Rav Yosef says not only Rabbi Chia bar Rabbi, also Rabbi Shai bar Rabbi also was there. And Rav Safra says not only Rabbi Chia bar Rabbi and Rabbi Shai bar Rabbi, but also Rabbi Shai bar Rabbi Chia is also there. So it comes out, according to Rav Safra, there were three people over there. And a guy came and he said, I already circumcised, but I didn't yet immerse. He wanted to know if it's good enough. So he told him it's not good enough. Wait until tomorrow and we're going to immerse you tomorrow. That was the story. And the Gemara assumes the reason why they didn't immerse him right away is because it was at night. It was nighttime. And that's what the Gemara is going to say, that you can't immerse him at nighttime. At last we could derive from this story three halachas. We never heard of this till now. The Gemara didn't mention this. Now is the first time that in order to do a conversion, you have to have three people. How do you see three people? The fact that Rav Safra said there was a third person. The first one says only one. Second one said there's two. Rav Safra said there's three, and the Gemara takes him to be the halacha that it has to be all three people after three people in order to make a conversion. That's what it says. You also might say it's only lachatchila, but the Gemara takes it as even to the Eved that it doesn't become a conversion only if you also had circumcision and also immersion. And the third thing is that the immersion can't be at night. That's the reason why they said to wait till tomorrow. And the Gemara Takashi, you see more things also. The name of maybe that could be maybe not three people, because the fact that there were three Talmid Chachamim over here, maybe that shows only a good bezin if it's three Talmid Chachamim. Dilma the Iklu, maybe it happened to be Talmid Chachamim, not Dafka. It would have been a good bezin even if it would have been a Diotim. And the Gemara ends off on Rav Chia Bar Abba Rav Yochanan Geret Sarach Gimel Mishpat Ksibei. Where do you learn out this halacha that you have to have three people? Because it says the word Mishpat. Where does it say the word Mishpat? Not so clear. Taisa brings a couple of pshatim on the bottom, which is also like a drash, which doesn't sound like a pashup pshat. It says here, the pashup pshat is not talking about the actual gerus. Also, pashup pshat doesn't sound like it's coming to talk about the actual conversion, but that's the Gemara's drash, that you have to have three people. And go back now. Now we finished the Gemara now for today, but to go back, what the Gemara said in the beginning about the conversion of this woman, that she went for her nidos, or the man who went for his carry, that's why we show the mask. You have to have three people. How could they be a good conversion? And that Taisa says maybe only the Kabbalah mitzvahs, only when he accepts that he can do the mitzvahs, that has to be in front of three people. The actual immersion maybe doesn't have to have three people. It means on the Gemara later on is going to say they're supposed to have two Talmidei Chachamim there, who also tell him the mitzvahs, when he goes to the mikvah also, when he immerses, maybe that's not only L'Chil, not the Yeved, but once you have all these Gemaras, so it's not so simple like the Gemara first sounded in the beginning. Yashikov, everybody.
You say something about
Thank you.
Miller? Is the outside?
Rav Gans reminds us that today, Yashikov, Rav Gans reminds us that today is the art of Rav Avigdor Miller. So I didn't prepare, but just to say something about him, amazingly unique personality that brought Yesodos that people didn't get from the standard education or Sfarim that they learned. And it's not even, he takes from the Chovos Halvavos, but you could say that he mamish took the Yesodis that it says in the Chovos Halvavos and he brought it to life and expanded on it very, very much. He has many books that people have become mamish of the Hashem because of them. And he teaches two things. I would say that there are 2 points. As far as happiness goes, what makes a person happy? He talked about appreciation. There's another ingredient, which is accomplishment. I'm not sure if he stresses that so much, but he talks about appreciation, and there's so much to appreciate, endless appreciation, and it's avodas Hashem. To first realize that it's avodas Hashem. Also, in parentheses, it's a secret to happiness. People that don't appreciate, they always want more. They're never satisfied, and there's many millions and billions that they're going to make. It's not going to help anything because it's a hole in the pocket. They don't appreciate it. So instead of looking for more, first thing is to sew up the hole and to appreciate what you have. Many of his teachings apply to Goyim also. Many of his teachings apply to all humanity, not only to Jews, applies to humanity, and a lot of his books should be given out also by Goyim. And a lot of the basics of morality that everyone is trying to break down, which also a very important thing that Rabbi Miller was very strong, that it's not enough that the Jews should just close themselves up and do what's right. They have to also care about the Goyim that are around them, and if there's somebody to vote for, and they might give more money to the yeshivas, but he's going to be for gay rights. So chas v'shalom that the Jews should support somebody like that. The Jews are responsible for the avodas Hashem of the Goyim also. It doesn't have to be that we care about them personally, but you have to care about Hashem. If you care about Hashem, it should bother us very much that the Goyim don't know about Hashem. And you say Hodu in the morning, Hodu Hashem, Kiru B'Shmo, Dir B'Amim Alilosav, Shirulo, Zamalo, Sicha B'Chol. It's talking about again and again, Shiru Hashem Kol Haaretz, that you're supposed to care about the world to know Hashem's name. And I think that's something, at least the Yesod, to mention. And of course, it doesn't do justice to Rabbi Miller in just to say 2 minutes, but something, L'chod, his yahrzeit today should be supposed for all Am Yisrael. And amazingly, that even it was dormant after many years that he died. Nobody really spoke about him. But then the Talmid, some Talmidim, they realized the gold mine that he had written and spoken, and now it's available in book form, in pamphlet form. Every Shabbos you could download 10 pages of Divrei Torah, but not after the parsha. Go to the parsha, but it's really just listening to Rabbi Miller from different tapes that they transcribed. Beautiful source of Yevamos and Midos and Deos that are available to anybody that can get every parsha. And tapes, of course, and books. He should be a Mele Social of Am Yisrael, and he should get many schuyos for that he has implanted in Am Yisrael.
Amen. Shakar.
Thank you.
Did you say that